Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping straight into something really foundational for anyone navigating the digital world: NIST frameworks. We've got source material covering these tools from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Think cybersecurity, privacy. It's all in there. Our goal, to really get under the hood, pull out the key ideas, and understand how these frameworks actually help organizations handle, all the complexities of IT security and privacy today.
And it's crucial with tech evolving so fast, cloud, AI, everything having some kind of standard approach, a common language, is becoming absolutely essential for just operating effectively and maintaining trust.
Couldn't agree more. So for you listening, the idea is you'll walk away with a much clearer picture of these really powerful NIST tools. Okay, let's get into it. So maybe let's start with the basics. How do our sources define the application of IT in an organization?
Well, they frame it as the systematic use of hardware and software. Basically for transmitting, changing, accessing, and storing data. And the key, as the sources point out, is doing all that securely and efficiently.
Right. And why do organizations bother adopting all this tech in the first place, according to the sources?
Two main reasons, really. One is pretty obvious: to enhance business operations, make things run smoother, faster, better. But the other is just as critical: protecting assets. That means digital assets, your data, IP, customer info, and even physical assets that rely on digital systems.
So it's fundamental. The sources actually say selecting and deploying management information systems is critical to success.
Absolutely. It's not just a tech issue. It's a core business necessity now.
Okay, so that's IT. Now, where does NIST fit in, the National Institute of Standards and Technology? Our sources mention it was established way back in 1901.
That's right, 1901. And its original mission was quite different, more focused on industrial competitiveness, removing barriers, promoting U.S. research, standard physical stuff mostly.
But obviously things changed. When did they get into the cybersecurity game?
The sources point to 1995 as a key moment. That's when NIST Special Publication 812 came out, an introduction to information security. That really marked their formal move into setting standards for the digital world, recognizing security was becoming a major issue.
And that leads us to the main event for today's deep dive. Our sources focus on what they call the three most prolific sets of standardized frameworks from NIST.
Right. We're going to unpack the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, or CSF.
Then the NIST Privacy Framework.
And finally, NIST SP 853, which covers security and privacy controls more broadly, especially for federal systems.
Okay, let's tackle the big one first. The NIST Cybersecurity Framework, the CSF. Key thing right off the bat, the sources stress this is voluntary.
Exactly. It's not a regulation for most organizations. It's guidance, a tool to help manage cybersecurity risk.
And it's built around three main parts.
Yeah. The sources break it down into the framework core, the framework implementation tiers, and the framework profile.
Let's maybe start with the why.
Yeah.
Why was the CSF even created?
Well, it actually came out of a legislative push. There was a need, especially for critical infrastructure, to have controls explained in, plain language.
Yeah.
The goal wasn't just listing controls, but providing a way to identify, assess, and manage cyber risks cost-effectively and, importantly, repeatably. It needed to be practical.
Practical. Okay. So let's look at that first component, the framework core. This is the operational bit, right? The 5 functions.
That's it. The sources call them 5 areas of focus. And it's really important to understand these aren't steps in a sequence. You don't do identify, then do protect.
Okay, so they're concurrent, happening all the time.
Exactly. They should be ongoing activities within your risk management program.
All right, let's walk through them. What's the first one? Identify.
Identify is all about knowing yourself, basically. What assets do you have? Hardware, software, data. Who are your users? What are your business processes? You need to create those records, those inventories. It's foundational because, well, you can't protect something if you don't even know you have it.
Makes sense. Okay, number 2, protect.
Protect is where you put the safeguards in place. This covers a lot: access controls, making sure only the right people see the right things. Also, software updates, encryption, good data backups, secure disposal plans for old equipment or data, and crucially, user training. These are your proactive defenses.
Got it. Proactive, then comes detect.
Right, because no matter how good your protections are, things can still happen. Detect is about spotting trouble when it brews. This means having tools and processes for monitoring network access, user devices, looking for unauthorized access attempts, or maybe high-risk behavior. How do you know an incident is occurring?
Okay, so you've detected something. What's next? Respond.
Respond. This function outlines what you do during an incident. How do you contain it? Do you have response plans ready to go? It also covers communication. Who do you tell? When? Analyzing the impact, mitigating the loss. It's your incident management playbook.
And finally, after the dust settles, recover.
Recover is about getting back to business as usual, restoring network operations, maybe repairing equipment, getting data back from backups. It also includes figuring out how to position employees to resume their duties and, importantly, learning lessons to improve for next time.
Identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. The 5 core functions. But the sources say there's more detail underneath. Categories and subcategories.
Yeah, it gets more granular. Below those 5 functions, there are 23 categories. Think of these as linking the high-level function to a specific desired outcome, like asset management under identify.
Okay.
And then below the categories are 108 subcategories. These are the real how-to details. They divide the categories into specific technical or management activities. These are the actual controls.
Can you give an example of the subcategory?
Sure, the source material uses ID.DE1. The organization's role in the supply chain is identified and communicated. It's a specific task under the business environment category within the identify function.
And the interesting thing you mentioned earlier is how these connect to other standards.
Right. That subcategory, IDBE1, explicitly references things like COBIT 5, ISO 27001, and even NIST SP 853. It shows the CSF isn't trying to reinvent the wheel everywhere. It provides a structure that can map to controls you might already be using from other frameworks. It helps unify things.
That integration piece is key. Let's make this more concrete with that Falcon CPA's case study from the sources.
Yeah.
How do they use the framework?
Okay, so Falcon, an accounting firm, used NIST-based software for a client. This software scanned the client's network.
And it flagged some issues.
Yeah, it flagged high-risk behavior, someone accessing records at odd hours, weekends, that kind of thing, and also lots of USB drive usage, red flags.
Which led them to find
An employee in payroll stealing banking information, basically using those off hours and USB drives to cover their tracks.
So mapping this to the CSF functions, the software flagging the behavior, that's clearly the detect function in action, right?
Absolutely. The monitoring tools identified anomalous activity, signaling a potential incident.
And then Falcon's actions after the detection. Investigating, figuring out the impact, telling affected people.
That falls squarely under the respond function. Analyzing, communicating, mitigating the immediate problem.
And the follow-up. Restoring data, maybe tightening controls on USBs or access times, dealing with the employee.
That's the recover function. Restoring operations, improving defenses based on what happened, and implementing corrective actions. It shows that detect, respond, recover cycle playing out.
The sources also had that analogy. The locked door versus the webcam. How does that fit?
Right, the locked door is prevention trying to stop someone getting in. It aligns with the protect function.
But the webcam, it doesn't stop them, it just records them.
Exactly. The webcam is detection. It spots the event happening or after it happens.
But the source made the point that the webcam could also deter someone, right? If they see it, they might not try.
Precisely. And that's the nuance. While monitoring tools are primarily for detection, just having them and maybe letting people know you have them can discourage bad behavior. So detection can indirectly support the protect function too. They're interconnected.
Okay, that makes sense. So that's the framework core. What about the second component, the framework implementation tiers? What's their purpose?
The tiers are different. They aren't about which controls you implement, but how well your organization manages cybersecurity risk overall. Think of it as a maturity benchmark.
A benchmark. And there are 4 tiers.
4 tiers. The sources lay them out pretty clearly. Tier 1 is partial. Risk management is kind of ad hoc, reactive. You deal with problems as they pop up. Limited awareness of external threats. Very basic.
Okay, starting point.
Tier 2 is risk-informed. Here, you start prioritizing based on actual risk assessments. Management gets involved. There's awareness of cyber risk, but it might still be siloed from the rest of the business. You know about external threats, but maybe don't act consistently. Better, but still disconnected.
Getting more structured.
Tier 3 is repeatable. This is a big jump. Cybersecurity practices are formalized, written down in policies. It's integrated into planning. There's an organization-wide approach. Communication is regular. You actually collaborate with others on security. Things are documented and repeatable.
Much more mature. And Tier 4.
Tier 4 is adaptive. This is the top level. Cybersecurity is woven into the fabric of the organization, prioritized like any other major business risk. You're constantly learning from incidents, improving iteratively. You actively participate and contribute to the wider security community. Very proactive, always adapting.
So the tiers basically show how integrated and sophisticated your security management practices are.
Exactly. They help you understand where you are on that maturity spectrum and where you might need to improve your overall approach, not just individual controls.
Which leads us to the third piece, framework profiles. What are these used for?
Profiles are the mechanism for tailoring the CSF to your specific needs. The sources say they help measure risk and establish a roadmap. Think of it as your organization's specific implementation guide for the CSF.
And what goes into creating a profile?
It should reflect your specific context. So your business goals, industry requirements, any legal or regulatory pressures, best practices you want to follow, and your own risk management priorities.
And NIST recommends a specific process using profiles: current, target, gap.
Yeah, it's very practical. You create a current profile. Here's where we are right now, mapping your existing activities to the CSF categories and subcategories. Then you define a target profile. Here's where we want to be based on your goals and risk assessment.
And the difference is the gap analysis.
Precisely. The gap analysis shows you the delta between your current state and your target state. The sources explicitly say this analysis serves as the roadmap, the driver for change. It tells you what you need to work on.
So putting it together, the profiles define your specific journey and track progress towards your goals, while the tiers measure how well your overall risk management machine is running.
That's a good way to think about it. Profiles are about achieving specific outcomes. Tiers are about the maturity and effectiveness of the processes you use to get there. They complement each other.
Okay, a solid overview of the CSF. Let's switch gears now to the NIST privacy framework. This one's newer, right? Early 2020.
That's right, relatively recent. And its focus is narrower, specifically on protecting individuals' privacy when organizations process their data.
And like the CSF, it's voluntary and designed to be flexible.
Yes, industry agnostic. And the sources mention it tries to account for different cultural views on privacy, which is an interesting challenge.
The big thing seems to be the structural similarity to the CSF. It also have core, profiles, and tiers.
It does. The structure is very parallel. Framework core for the functions, framework profiles for tailoring and measuring sophistication, and implementation tiers for gauging maturity and driving change. If you understand the CSF structure, the privacy framework feels familiar.
And there's overlap in the concepts, too. The sources show that graphic.
Yeah, concepts like identify and protect appear in both, marked P for privacy or C for cybersecurity. But interestingly, detect, respond, and recover are marked C in that graphic.
Meaning the privacy framework actually borrows those directly from the CSF.
Exactly. The sources give a clear example. The privacy framework suggests using the CSX detect, respond, and recover functions to handle cybersecurity-related privacy events. Think data breaches caused by hacking.
So instead of inventing new privacy incident response steps, you leverage your existing security incident response.
Right. It promotes integration and efficiency, recognizing that security failures often lead to privacy harms.
Okay, let's look at the privacy framework core then. Appendix A, the sources say, and it has 8 functions, more than the CSF.
8 functions, yes. Some are unique to privacy, others overlap or are borrowed from the CSF. The sources frame them around key questions. First, identify P. What are our privacy risks related to data processing? This involves inventorying personal data, understanding the business context, assessing risks, managing ecosystem risks.
So similar to CSF identify, but focused on personal data risks.
Precisely. Then govern P. What's our governance structure for privacy? Policies, risk strategy, training, monitoring. How do we oversee privacy?
Makes sense.
Control P. How do we manage the actual data processing to protect privacy? Policies for processing, managing the data itself, maybe using techniques like dissociated processing to minimize identifiable data.
Okay, managing the flow.
Communicate Bash P. How do we talk about privacy risks? Policies for internal and external communication about privacy practices.
Important for transparency.
Then protect Bash P. Similar to CSF, protect what safeguards do we need specifically for personal data.
Right.
And then the borrowed ones. Detect. How do we spot privacy events? Respond. How do we react to them? And recover. How do we get back to normal after a privacy incident?
So it's a blend of privacy-specific governance and controls, plus leveraging existing security incident capabilities. And these functions also break down further.
Yep. 29 categories and 100 subcategories below those 8 functions. Again, getting down to the specific controls.
What about the privacy framework profiles? Are they just like the CSF ones?
The sources say they operate identically. NIST clearly saw the current profile, target profile, gap analysis model worked well, so they replicated it for privacy.
So, same process. Assess where you are, define where you want to be, identify the gaps to create your privacy improvement roadmap,
Exactly the same methodology.
and the implementation tiers for privacy, also mirroring the CSF, partial, risk-informed, repeatable, adaptive.
They mirror the CSF tiers in name and basic concept, gauging maturity, communicating performance. The underlying subdivisions like risk management process, program integration, ecosystem relationships are also very similar, just framed for privacy.
But the sources highlighted a difference. Something about the workforce.
Ah, yes, that's a key distinction. The privacy framework tiers add workforce as a specific dimension for measuring maturity.
How does that work?
It means the tiers explicitly evaluate how well the workforce aspect of your privacy program is developed. So Tier 1, partial, might mean no dedicated privacy staff, ad hoc training. Tier 4, adaptive, would mean dedicated personnel, regular, comprehensive, role-based privacy training throughout the organization. It puts a spotlight on the people part of privacy maturity.
Interesting. And there was another subtle difference mentioned about progression and purpose.
Right. The privacy framework seems to suggest a slightly more structured progression through the tiers, building on the goals of the previous one, and it positions the tiers more broadly as a measure of overall privacy maturity, whereas the CSF tiers are often described more narrowly as measuring the effectiveness of how you implement your security profile. A slight shift in emphasis.
Okay, good distinctions to note. That covers the two voluntary frameworks. Now for the third one, NIST SP 853. Security and privacy controls. This one sounds more serious.
It is. The sources describe SP 853 as evolving into the comprehensive catalog of controls, especially becoming the standard for U.S. federal information systems.
And the key difference in tone is it's stricter.
Definitely stricter. The sources emphasize this. Its origins are really in protecting federal systems from sophisticated threats, think nation states.
Yeah.
So while CSF and privacy framework are often about cost-effective best practices, SP 853 is about robustness.
Robustness comes at a cost, though. The sources mentioned nearly 1,200 controls.
Yeah, it's extensive. Nearly 1,200 detailed controls. While it encourages tailoring based on risk, implementing SP 853 comprehensively can be a very heavy lift, potentially burdensome if you don't absolutely need that level of rigor.
So who does need it? What's its main purpose and applicability?
Fundamentally, it provides controls for any system handling information. But its core applicability, driven by U.S. policy, is for federal information systems.
The sources mention specific regulations,
Yes.
OMB A130 and FISMA.
Exactly. Those require federal agencies to implement security controls, and SP 853 provides the standard catalog of controls to meet those requirements. So for federal agencies and often their contractors, it's not optional like the CSF, it's mandatory.
Who's the intended audience then? Just the IT security folks?
Far from it. The sources list a really wide range, authorizing officials, CIOs, system developers, engineers, procurement folks involved in logistics, system admins doing implementation, auditors, inspectors general, even commercial vendors providing components or services.
Wow, okay. So implementing this really touches almost every part of an organization involved with IT systems.
It has to. And the sources list specific organizational responsibilities when using SP 853. Things like having well-defined requirements, using trustworthy components, rigorous planning and lifecycle management, applying security engineering, documenting everything, and continuous monitoring. It's a deep, ongoing commitment.
Structurally, how is SP 853 organized? Control families.
Yes, 20 control families, grouping controls by the type of risk they address.
Can you give us a flavor of those families? Maybe pick a few key ones.
Sure. There's AC, access control, who gets access to what. AT, awareness and training, making sure people know the risks. IR, incident response, handling breaches. PE, physical and environmental protection, securing the buildings and hardware. CM, configuration management, keeping systems configured securely. PL, planning, the overall security planning process.
And the sources highlighted two new families in the latest version, Revision 5.
Right. PT, PII processing and transparency, which directly addresses privacy concerns around personally identifiable information. And SR, supply chain risk management, tackling the growing risks from vendors and suppliers.
Those additions really show it's keeping pace with modern threats.
Definitely. And within each family, you have controls the main objectives, and sometimes control enhancements, which add specificity or strength, often needed for higher security levels.
The sources also mention something specific about the language, bracketed text.
Yes, the organization defined parameters. Lots of control statements have bracketed, italicized text like assignment. Organization defined value. The organization has to fill in those blanks with specific numbers, lists, procedures relevant to them. It forces very concrete implementation choices.
That sounds incredibly detailed, much more prescriptive than the CSF.
It is. And speaking of changes, Revision 5 made a big one compared to Rev 4, according to the sources. It dropped the old baseline system, low, moderate, high.
Yeah, why did they do that?
The rationale, per the sources, was that those baselines were really tied to federal system sensitivity levels and didn't translate well or were confusing for private sector use. Rev 5 favors a more flexible approach, comprehensive conformance, where you select controls based on your own risk assessment, not a predefined baseline.
Trying to make it more broadly usable, perhaps, even with the complexity. Okay, last piece on SB 853. How do you actually implement these hundreds of controls? The sources mention 3 approaches.
Right. On a per-control basis, you can implement them in 3 ways. Common controls, sometimes called inheritable. These are implemented once at the organizational level, and multiple systems inherit them. Think organization-wide policies, maybe central authentication systems. System-specific controls. These are applied only to a particular system due to its unique needs or risks. Tailored configurations, specific software patches, etc.
Makes sense.
And hybrid controls, which is really just acknowledging that most organizations will use a mix. Some controls are common, some are system-specific. It's the practical reality.
Okay, wow. That's a lot to absorb. We've covered the CSF for general risk management, the privacy framework for data protection, and the much stricter SP 853, especially key for federal systems. 3 distinct NIST pillars.
And hopefully, seeing them side by side highlights why there isn't just one NIST framework. You have the voluntary flexible guidance of CSF and privacy for broader use, and then the detailed, rigorous controls of SP 853 for environments needing that higher level of assurance. It's about having the right tool for the job, matching the framework to the risk context and requirements.
Absolutely. So for you listening, the hope is this deep dive gives you a clearer mental map of these really important NIST resources and how they function, how they differ, and how they might apply to different situations.
And it's worth remembering that interconnection we talked about. The privacy framework pulling from the CSF referencing SP 853, they aren't totally separate silos. NIST is trying to build a cohesive ecosystem of standards, which is pretty smart.
So bringing it back to the listener, reflecting on these frameworks, their scopes, their levels of detail, what's the takeaway for someone trying to figure out which approach fits their situation?
I think the big question it leaves you with is this. If you're looking at an organization, maybe your own, maybe one you work with, how do you strategically weigh all the factors? Your specific risks, your industry, regulations, your current capabilities, your budget. How do you weigh all that to decide which NIST framework, or maybe which blend of elements from different frameworks, is actually the right fit? It's not always a simple choice.
A really critical question. Choosing the right path requires understanding these tools first. Hopefully this discussion provides a solid foundation for that thinking. Definitely encourage you to keep exploring based on the sources